Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary. I wanted to ask you a couple questions about the banking situation that we're facing today, but I just want to start, Mr. Chairman, because I've heard this discussion on the other side about the deficit. You know, I've been here for 14 years. The deficit and the debt hasn't gotten any better over that period of time, but I think and the good news is, if we want to work together, we could actually close the gap, because the gap isn't that gigantic compared to the way it's been in other places. If we could get it to a place where our government, our deficit wasn't growing faster than our GDP, that would be a really good step forward. But I just want to point out that we need to recognize that we have this problem today, this gap, because of the Bush and Trump tax cuts. And the deal that made 80% of the Bush tax cuts permanent, 80% of the Bush tax cuts permanent, a deal that I and Tom Carper were the only Democrats to vote against. There were 3 Republicans who voted against it. When you combine that, and when you combine that with what we did with the Trump tax cuts, that's 2% plus 1% of GDP. That's 3% of GDP right there. So we would have closed that gap and been well on our way. So I'm not, you know, I know that it's going to be a mix of spending cuts and it's going to be a mix of revenue, and that's how we get back to a place where, you know, you get a 19% of GDP of taxes and a 19% of GDP of spending. That's a felicitous place for us to be, because, you know, maybe before we're dead, we actually will move beyond the political talking points and do something useful for our kids and our grandkids. But I just want the math to reflect that. And that's why I voted against that bill. That's why I think Tom Carper voted against that bill. And I said, you know, in my completely unnoticed campaign for president, on a debate stage with the thank you, you're nice to say so, but I said with a person who became the president of the United States, that was a terrible deal that was struck between the Obama administration and Mitch McConnell, frankly, to extend those tax cuts permanently. So until we get to a place where we're willing to actually have a rational conversation about what it looks like, what every single state in the union I'm aware of, the conversation they have to have, because they have, you know, a duty and a responsibility to actually balance their budget. And I'm not even saying we have to balance it. Let's just get to a place where our debt is less than 3% of our GDP. We could make some progress. And there isn't a committee in Congress that's better situated than this committee to do it. That's not even what I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to talk to you about the child tax credit, Madam Secretary, and all the evidence that we have that it worked, it did what it was supposed to do, and that you guys did an amazing job of implementing it. And so I'm going to leave that question for the record as well. I just want to go to the banking issue that we have in front of us right now, Madam Secretary. It's obvious to you and to me that marijuana, I'm going to get to the banking, but marijuana has been legal in Colorado for 9 years. But legal cannabis businesses are frozen out of the financial system, the finance system. Banks refuse to provide them financial services because of strict federal laws and regulations that prohibit them from offering services to cannabis businesses. Banking regulators can permanently ban someone from working at a bank or revoke an institution's FDIC coverage for working with cannabis businesses. This endangers the lives and livelihoods of Colorado business owners who have to operate in this kind of situation. They have nowhere to put their cash. Last weekend, Signature Bank failed. The other bank that failed, Silicon Valley Bank, you know, here's what they had to do to fail. They had to not observe the fact that their balance sheet had basically tripled over, you know, some period of time. Not observe the fact that they were in a volatile, high-tech industry where the tide comes in and goes out for all those tech companies at exactly the same time, which is what we're seeing today. They had to make a decision to lay on 10-year paper with ridiculously high interest rates, and they weren't even that high, but compared to, low interest rates compared to the interest rates that we were about to be challenged by the Fed. And I can tell you, unless somebody around here knows something, I don't know, Jay Powell wasn't exactly secretive about what he was doing with that. They had to get that through their board, they had to get that through that audit committee, and somehow they had to get that through a regulator, I guess, who was looking over that, who wasn't saying, this is insane what they were doing. We've had all week, it's been, is it Dodd-Frank, not Dodd-Frank, 2018, not 2018? I don't know what the answer is going to be about any of that, but I know that what they were doing was not prudentially sound, and I hope that the regulator would be the backstop. I'm 30 seconds over, so I will stop to go back to my marijuana question. Last weekend, Signature Bank failed, and almost a fifth of its deposits came from crypto. Like, they're not allowed to do anything with marijuana, but apparently they can lay 20% of this on crypto, a notoriously unstable, a thing that nobody here even understands, and where the value of the assets can soar and collapse. We've seen that in this sector. And my question is, what questions come to your mind when you see that? When you've got a bank that's now failed, where 20% of what it was relying on to claim that it was doing the right thing by its depositors was something I would argue isn't even as stable as the marijuana industry in the state of Colorado, which can't get any approval from the Treasury Department.
Well, as you pointed out, in the case of marijuana, it is against federal law, and that's a barrier, unfortunately, to appropriate banking services for the industry, and it's something the regulators have been looking for solutions to. I think we need to look into the regulators do exactly what happened to create the problems that these two banks that failed faced, and make sure that our regulatory system and supervision is appropriately geared so that banks manage their risks to avoid problems of the type that these banks have suffered from.
Senator Bennet, thank you, and thank you for always being there to point out when numbers don't add up, because that's exactly what the budget chairman, who's a member of this committee, Senator Whitehouse, just found a couple of days ago with respect to the House of Republicans. Senator Warren.